Alright, let's see. Are we good? Good sound. Alright, turn that off. So, you want to hear? Oh, shit. Can't see stuff like that. Alright. So, part 2 today of the Malleus Maleficarum. Where did we stop? So, maybe we'll finish book 1. We will see. Probably not. I kind of want a game, but we'll see. Alright. Hopefully the sound's fixed. Hopefully. Question 9. Whether witches may work some prestigatory illusion so that the male organ appears to be entirely removed and separate from the body. Here is declared the truth about diabolic operations with regard to the male organ. And to make plain the facts in this matter, it is asked whether witches can, with the help of devils, really and actually remove the member, or whether they only do so apparently by some glamour or illusion. And that they can actually do so is argued a fortiori. For since devils can do greater things than this, as killing them or carrying them from place to place, as was shown above in the cases of Job and Tobias, therefore they can also truly and actually remove men's members. Again, an argument is taken from the gloss on the visitations of bad angels in the Psalms. God punishes by means of bad angels, as he often punished the people of Israel with various diseases, truly and actually visited upon their bodies. Therefore the member is equally subject to such visitations. It may be said that this is done with the divine permission, and in that case it has already been said that God allows more power of witchcraft over the genital functions on account of the first corruption of sin, which came to us from the act of generation. So also he allows greater power over the actual genital organ, even to its removal. And again, it was a greater thing to turn Lot's wife into a pillar of salt than it is to take away the male organ, and that, Genesis 19, was a real and actual, not an apparent metamorphosis, for it is said that that pillar is still to be seen, and this was done by a bad angel, just as the good angels struck the men of Sodom with blindness, so that they could not find the door of the house. And so it was with the other punishments of the men of Gomorrah. The gloss indeed affirms that Lot's wife was herself tainted with that vice, and therefore she was punished. And again, whoever can create a natural shape can also take it away, but devils have created many natural shapes, as is clear from Pharaoh's magicians, who with the help of the devils made frogs and serpents. Also, St. Augustine in book 83 says that those things which are visibly done by the lower powers of the air cannot be considered to be mere illusions, but even men are able to, by some skillful incision, to remove the male organ. Therefore devils can do invisibly what others do visibly. But on the contrary side, St. Augustine says, it is not to be believed that through the art of or power of devils, man's body can be changed into the likeness of a beast. Therefore it is equally impossible that that should be removed which is essential to the truth of the human body. Also, he says, it must not be thought that this substance of visible matter is subject to the will of those fallen angels, for it is subject only to God. Answer. There is no doubt that certain witches can do marvelous things with regard to male organs, for this agrees with what has been seen and heard by many, and with the general account of what has been known concerning that member through the senses of sight and touch. And as to how this thing is possible, it is to be said that it can be done in two ways, either actually and in fact, as the first arguments have said, or through some prestige or glamour. But when it is performed by witches, it is only a matter of glamour, although it is no illusion in the opinion of the sufferer, for his imagination can really and actually believe that something is not present, since by none of his exterior sense, such as sight or touch, can he perceive that it is present. From this it may be said that there is a true abstraction of the member in imagination, although not in fact, and several things are to be noted as to how this happens. And first, as to two methods by which it can be done. It is no wonder that the devil can deceive the outer human senses, since, as has been treated of above, he can elude the inner senses by bringing to actual perception ideas that are stored in the imagination. Moreover, he deceives men in their natural functions, causing that which is visible to be invisible to them, and that which is tangible to be intangible, and the audible inaudible, and so with the other senses. But such things are not true in actual fact, since they are caused through some defect introduced in the sense, such as the eyes, or the ears, or the touch, by reason of which defect man's judgment is deceived. And we can illustrate this from certain natural phenomena. For sweet wine appears bitter on the tongue of the fevered, his taste being deceived not by the actual fact, but through his disease. So also in the case under consideration, the deception is not due to fact, since the member is still actually in its place, but it is an illusion of the sense with regard to it. Again, as has been said above concerning the generative powers, the devil can obstruct that action by imposing some other body of the same color and appearance, in such a way that some smoothly fashioned body in the color of flesh is interposed between the sight and touch, and between the true body of the sufferer, so that it seems to him that he can see and feel nothing but a smooth body with its surface interrupted by no genital organ. See the sayings of St. Thomas concerning glamours and illusions, and also in the second of the second 91, and in his questions concerning sin, where he frequently quotes that of St. Augustine in book 83. This evil of the devil creeps in through all these sensual approaches. He gives himself to figures, he adapts himself to colors, he abides in sound, he lurks in smells, he infuses himself into flavors. Besides, it is to be considered that such an illusion of the sight and touch can be caused not only by the interposition of some smooth, unmembered body, but also by the summoning to the fancy or imagination of certain forms and ideas latent in the mind, in such a way that a thing is imagined as being perceived then for the first time. For, as was shown in the preceding question, devils can by their own power change bodies locally, and just as the disposition or humor can be affected in this way, so can the natural functions. I speak of things which appear natural to the imagination or senses. For Aristotle in the De Somno et Ugila says, assigning the cause of apparitions and dreams, that when an animal sleeps much blood flows to the inner consciousness, and thence come ideas or impressions derived from actual previous experiences stored in the mind. It has already been defined how thus certain appearances convey the impressions of new experiences, and since this can happen naturally, much more can the devil call to the imagination the appearance of a smooth body, unprovided with the virile member, in such a way that the sense believe it to be an actual fact. Secondly, some other methods are to be noted, which are easier to understand and to explain. For, according to St. Isidore, a glamour is nothing but a certain delusion of the senses, and especially of the eyes, and for this reason it is also called a prestige, from prestringo, since the sight of the eyes is so fettered that things seem to be other than they are. And Alexander of Hales, Part 2, says that a prestige, properly understood, is an illusion of the devil, which is not caused by any change in matter, but only exists in the mind of him who is deluded, either as to the inner or outer perceptions. Excuse me. Wherefore, in a manner of speaking, we may say even of human prestigatory art, that it can be effected in three ways. For the first, it can be done without devils, since it is artificially done by the agility of men, who show things and conceal them, as in the case of the tricks of conjurers and ventriloquists. The second method is also without the help of devils, as when men can use some natural virtue in natural bodies or minerals so as to impart to such objects some other appearance quite different from their true appearance. Wherefore, according to St. Thomas and several others, men by by the smoke of certain smoldering or lighted herbs, can make rods appear to be serpents. The third method of delusion is effected with the help of devils, the permission of God being granted, for it is clear that devils have, of their nature, some power over certain earthly matters, which they exercise upon them when God permits, so that things appear to be other than they are. And as to the third method, it is to be noted that the devil has 5 ways in which he can delude anyone so that he thinks a thing to be other than it is. First, by artificial tricks, as has been said, for that which a man can do by art, the devil can do even better. Second, by a natural method, by the application, as has been said, and interposition of some substance so as to hide the true body, or by confusing it in man's fancy. The third way is when in an assumed body he presents himself as being something which he is not. As witness the story which St. Gregory tells in his first dialogue of a nun who ate a lettuce, which, however, as the devil confessed, was not a lettuce, but the devil in the form of a lettuce, or in the lettuce itself. Or as when he appeared to St. Anthony in a lump of gold, which he found in the desert. Or as when he touches a railman and makes him appear like a brute animal, as will shortly be explained. The fourth method is when he confuses the organ of sight so that a clear thing seems hazy, or the converse, or when an old woman appears to be a young girl. For even after weeping, the light appears different from what it was before. His fifth method is by working in the imaginative power, and by a disturbance of the humors, effecting a transmutation in the forms perceived by the senses, as has been treated of before, so that the senses then perceive as it were fresh and new images. And accordingly, by the last 3 of these methods, and even by the second, the devil can cast a glamour over the senses of a man, wherefore there is no difficulty in concealing the virile member by some prestige or glamour. And a manifest proof or example of this, which was revealed to us in our inquisitorial capacity, will be set forth later, where more is recounted of these and other matters in the second part of this treatise, how bewitchment can be distinguished from a natural defect. An incidental question, which with certain other difficulties follows. Peter's member has been taken off, and he does not know whether it is by witchcraft or in some other way by the devil's power, with the permission of God. Are there any ways of determining or distinguishing between these? It can be answered as follows. First, that those to whom such things most commonly happen are adulterers or fornicators. For when they fail to respond to the demand of their mistress, or if they wish to desert them and attach themselves to other women, then their mistress, out of vengeance, through some other power causes their members to be taken off. Secondly, it can be distinguished by the fact that it is not permanent. For it is not due to witchcraft, then the loss is not permanent, but it will be restored sometime. But here there arises another doubt, whether it is due to the nature of the witchcraft that it is not permanent. It is answered that it can be permanent and last until death, just as the canonists and theologians judge concerning the impediment of witchcraft in matrimony, that the temporary can become permanent. For Godfrey says in his Summa, a bewitchment cannot always be removed by him who caused it, either because he is dead or because he does not know how to remove it, or because the charm has been lost. Wherefore, we may say in the same way that the charm which has been worked on Peter will be permanent if the witch who did it cannot heal him. For there are 3 degrees of witches. For some both heal and harm, some harm but cannot heal, and some seem able only to heal, that is, to take away injuries, as will be shown later. For thus it happened to us. 2 witches were quarreling, and while they were taunting each other, one said, I am not so wicked as you, for I know how to heal those whom I injure. The charm will also be permanent if, before it has been healed, the witch departs, either by changing her dwelling or by dying. For St. Thomas also says, any charm may be permanent when it is such as can have no human remedy, or if it has a remedy, it is not known to men, or unlawful, although God can find a remedy through a holy angel who can coerce the devil, if not the witch. However, The chief remedy against witchcraft is the sacrament of penitence, for bodily infirmity often proceeds from sin, and how the charms or witches can be removed will be shown in the second part of this treatise, and in the second question, chapter 6, where other different matters are treated of and explained. Solutions of the arguments. The first, it is clear that there is no doubt but that, just as, with God's permission, they can kill men, so also can devils taken off that member, as well as others, truly and actually. But then the devils do not work through the medium of witches, concerning which mention has already been made. And from this the answer to the second argument is also made clear. But this is to be said, that God allows more power of witchcraft over the genital forces because, etc., and therefore even allows that that member should be truly and actually taken off. But it is not valid to say that this always happens, for it would not be after the manner of witchcraft for it to happen so. And even the witches, when they do such works, do not pretend that they have not the power to restore the member when they wish to and know how to do so. From which it is clear that it is not actually taken off, but only by a glamour. As for the third, concerning the metamorphosis of Lot's wife, we say that this was actual and not a glamour. And as to the fourth, that the devil can create certain substantial shapes, and therefore can also remove them, it is to be said with regard to Pharaoh's magicians that they made true serpents, and that the devils can, with the help of another agent, produce certain effects on imperfect creatures, which they cannot on men, who are God's chief care. For it is said, does God care for oxen? They can, nevertheless, with the permission of God, do to men true and actual harm, as also they can create a glamour of harm, and by this the answer to the last argument is made clear. Question 10. Whether witches can by some glamour change men into beasts. Here we declare the truth as to whether and how witches transform men into beasts, and it is argued that this is not possible. From the following passage of Episcopus, whoever believes that it is possible for any creature to be changed for the better or for the worse, or to be transformed into any other shape or likeness, except by the Creator himself, who made all things, is without doubt an infidel and worse than a pagan. And we will quote the arguments of St. Thomas in the second book of Sentences, chapter 8, whether devils can affect the bodily senses by the delusion of a glamour. There he argues first that they cannot, for though that shape of a beast, which is seen must be somewhere, it cannot exist only in the senses, for the sense perceive no shape that is not received from actual matter, and there is no actual beast there. And he adduces the authority of the canon. And again, that which seems to be cannot really be, as in the case of a woman who seems to be a beast, for two substantial shapes cannot exist at one in the same time in the same matter. Therefore, since the shape of a beast which appears cannot exist anywhere, no glamour or illusion can exist in the eye of the beholder, for the sight must have some object in which it terminates. And if it is argued that exists in the surrounding atmosphere, this is not possible, both because the atmosphere is not capable of taking any shape or form, and also because the air around that person is not always constant and cannot be so on account of its fluid nature, especially when it is moved. And again, because in that case such transformation would be visible to everyone. But this is not so, because the devils seem to be unable to deceive the sight of holy men in the least. Besides, the sense of sight, or the faculty of vision, is a passive faculty, and every passive faculty is set in motion by the active agent that corresponds to it. Now the active agent corresponding to sight is twofold, one in the origin of the act, or the object, the other in the carrier or medium. But that apparent shape cannot be the object of the sense, neither can it be the medium through which it is carried. First, it cannot be the object, since it cannot be taken hold of by anything, as was shown in the foregoing argument. Since it does not exist in the senses received from an object, neither is it in the actual object, nor even in the air, as in a carrying medium, as was treated of above in the third argument. Besides, if the devil moves the inner consciousness, he does so either by projecting himself into the cognitive faculty or by changing it. But he does not do so by projecting himself, for he would either have to assume a body, and even so, could not penetrate into the inner organ of imagination. For two bodies cannot be at the same time in the same place, or he would assume a phantasmal body, and this again would be impossible, since no phantasm is quite without substance. Similarly, also he cannot do it by changing the cognition, for he would either change it by alteration, which he does not seem able to do, since all alteration is caused by active qualities, in which the devils are lacking, or he would change it by transformation or local motion, and this does not seem feasible for two reasons. First, because a transformation or an organ cannot be effected without a sense of pain. Secondly, because in this case the devil would only make things of a known shape appear. But St. Augustine says that he creates shapes of this sort, both known and unknown. Therefore it seems that the devils can in no way deceive the imagination or senses of a man. But against this, St. Augustine says that the transmutations of men into brute animals said to be done by the art of devils are not actual but only apparent. But this would not be possible if devils were not able to transmute the human senses. The authority of St. Augustine is again to point in Book 83, which has already been quoted. This evil of the devil creeps in through all the sensual approaches, etc. Answer. If the reader wishes to refer to the method of transmutation, he will find in the second part of this work, chapter 6, various methods. But proceeding for the present in a scholastic manner, let us say, in agreement with the opinions of the three doctors, that the devil can deceive the human fancy so that a man really seems to be an animal. The last of those opinions, which is that of St. Thomas, is more subtle than the rest, but the first is that of St. Antoninus, in the first part of his Summa 5, chapter 4, where he declares that the devil at times works to deceive a man's fancy, especially by an illusion of the senses, and he proves this by natural reasoning, by the authority of the canon, and by a great number of examples. And at first as follows: our bodies naturally are subject to and obey the angelic nature as regards local motion. But the bad angels, although they have lost grace, have not lost their natural power, as has often been said before. And since the faculty of fancy or imagination is corporeal, that is, allied to a physical organ, it also is naturally subject to devils, so that they can transmute it, causing various fantasies, by the flow of the thoughts and perceptions to the original image received by them. So says St. Antoninus, and adds that it is proved by the following canon, Episcopus 26, it must not be omitted that certain wicked women, perverted by Satan and seduced by the illusions and phantasms of devils, believe and profess that they ride in the night hours on certain beasts with Diana, the heathen goddess, or with Herodias, and with a countless number of women, and that in the untimely silence of night they travel over great distances of land. And later, wherefore priests ought to be preached to the people of God, that they should know this to be altogether false, and that when such phantasms afflict the minds of the faithful, it is not of God, but of an evil spirit. For Satan himself transforms himself into the shapes and likeness of different persons, and in dreams deluding the mind which he holds captive, leads it through devious ways. Indeed, the meaning of this canon has been treated of in the first question, as to the four things which are to be preached. But it would be to misunderstand its meaning to maintain that witches cannot be so transported when they wish, and God does not prevent it. For very often, men who are not witches are unwillingly transported bodily over great distances of land. But that these transmutations can be effected in both ways will be shown by the aforesaid Summa, and in the chapter where St. Augustine relates that it is read in the books of the Gentiles that a certain sorceress named Circe changed the companions of Ulysses into beasts. but that this was due to some glamour or illusion, rather than an actual accomplishment, by altering the fancies of men, and this is clearly proved by several examples. For we read in the lives of the fathers that a certain girl would not consent to a young man who was begging her to commit a shameful act with him. And the young man, being angry because of this, caused a certain Jew to work a charm against her, by which she was changed into a filly. But this metamorphosis was not an actual fact, but an illusion of the devil, who changed the fancy and sense of the girl herself, and of those who looked at her, so that she seemed to be a filly, who was really a girl. For when she was led to the blessed Macarius, the devil could not so work as to deceive his senses as he had those of other people, on account of his sanctity. For to him she seemed a true girl, not a filly, and at length by his prayer she was set free from the illusion. And it is said that this had happened to her because she did not give her mind to holy things, or attend the sacraments as she ought. Therefore the devil had power over her, although she was in other respects honest. Therefore, the devil can, by moving the inner perceptions and humors, effect changes in the actions and faculties, physical, mental, and emotional, working by means of any physical organ soever, and this accords with St. Thomas. And of this sort we may believe to have been the acts of Simon Magus, and the incantations which are narrated of him. But the devil can do none of these things without the permission of God, who with his good angels often restrains the wickedness of him who seeks to deceive and hurt us. Wherefore St. Augustine, speaking of witches, says, "These are they who with the permission of God stir up the elements and confuse the minds of those who do not trust in God." Also, devils can be by witchcraft cause a man to be unable to see his wife rightly, and the converse, and this comes from an affectation of the fancy, so that she is represented to him as an odious and horrible thing. The devil also suggests representations of loathsome things to the fancy of both the waking and the sleeping, to deceive them and lead them to some. But because sin does not consist in the imagination but in the will, therefore man does not sin in these fancies suggested by the devil, in these various transformations, unless of his own will he consents to sin. The second opinion of the modern doctors is to the same effect, when they declare what is glamour, and how many ways the devil can cause such illusions. Here we refer to what has already been said concerning the arguments of St. Antoninus, which there is no need to repeat. The third opinion is that of St. Thomas, and is an answer to the argument where it is asked, wherein lies the existence of the shape of a beast that is seen, in the senses, or in reality, or in the surrounding air. And his opinion is that the apparent shape of a beast only exists in the inner perception, which, through the force of imagination, sees it in some way as an exterior object, and the devil has two ways of effecting such a result. In one way, we may say that the form of animals which are conserved in the treasury of the imagination pass by the operation of the devil into the organs of inner senses. And in this way it happens in dreams, as has been declared above. And so, when these forms are impressed on the organs of the outer senses, such as sight, they appear as if they were present as outer objects, and could actually be touched. The other way results from a change in the inner organs of perception, through which the judgment is deceived, as is shown in the case of him who has his taste corrupted, so that everything sweet seems bitter, and this is not very different from the first method. Moreover, even men can accomplish this by the virtue of certain natural things, as when, in the vapor of a certain smoke, the beams of a house appear to be serpents, and many other instances of this are found, as had been mentioned above. Solutions of the arguments. As to the first argument, that text is often quoted, but it is badly understood, for as to where it speaks of transformation into another shape or likeness, it has been made clear how this can be done by prestidigitatory art. And as to where it says that no creature can be made by the power of the devil, this is manifestly true if made is understood to mean created. But if the word made is taken to refer to natural production, it is certain that the devils can make some imperfect creatures. And St. Thomas shows how this may be done, for he says that all transmutations of bodily matter, which can be effected by the forces of nature, in which the essential thing is the semen which is found in the elements of this world, on land or in the waters, as serpents and frogs and such things deposit their semen, can be effected by the work of devils, who have acquired such semen. So also it is when anything is changed into serpents or frogs, which can be generated by putrefaction. But those transmutations of bodily matter which cannot be affected by the forces of nature can in no way be truly affected by the work of the devils. For when the body of a man is changed into the body of a beast, or a dead body is brought to life, such things only seem to happen and are a glamour or illusion, or else the devil appears before men in an assumed body. These arguments are substantiated, for blessed Albertus in his book on animals, where he examines whether devils, or let us even say witches, can really make animals, say that they can, with God's permission, make imperfect animals. But they cannot do so in an instant, as God does, but by means of some motion, however sudden, as it is clear in the case of witches. And touching the passage in Exodus 7, where Pharaoh called his wise men, he says, "The devils run throughout the world and collect various germs, and by using them can evolve various species." And the gloss thereon says, "When witches attempt to effect anything by the invocation of devils, they run about the world and bring the semen of those things which are in question, and by its means, with the permission of God, they produce new species, but this has been spoken of above. Another difficulty may arise, whether such devils' work are to be deemed miraculous. The answer was made clear in the preceding arguments, that even the devils can perform certain miracles, to which their natural powers are adapted, and although such things are true in fact, they are not done with a view to the knowledge of the truth, and in this sense the works of Antichrist may be said to be deceptions, since they are done with a view to the seduction of men. The answer to the other argument, that concerning the shape, is also clear. The shape of a beast which is seen does not exist in the air, but only in the perception of the senses, as has been demonstrated above from the opinion of St. Thomas. For the argument that every passive is set in motion by its corresponding active, this is granted, but when it is inferred that the shape which is seen cannot be the original object which sets in motion the act of sight, since it arises from none of the sense, it is answered that it does not arise, since it originates from some sensible image conserved in the imagination, which the devil can draw out and present to the imagination or power of perception, as has been said above. For the last argument, it is to be said that the devil does not, as has been shown, change the perceptive and imaginative powers by projecting himself into them, but by transmuting them, not indeed by altering them, except in respect of local motion. For he cannot himself induce new appearances, as has been said, but he changes them by transmutation, that is, local motion. And this again he does, not by dividing the substance of the organ or of perception, since that would result in a sense of pain, but by a movement of the perceptions and humors. Question 11. That witches who are midwives in various ways kill the child conceived in the womb and procure an abortion, or if they do not this, offer newborn children to devils. Here is set forth the truth concerning 4 horrible crimes which devils commit against infants, both in the mother's womb and afterwards. And since the devils do these things through the medium of women, and not men, this form of homicide is associated rather with women than with men. And the following are the methods by which it is done. The canonists treat more fully than the theologians of the obstructions due to witchcraft, and they say that it is witchcraft not only when anyone is unable to perform the carnal act, of which we have spoken above, but also when a woman is prevented from conceiving or is made to miscarry after she has conceived. A third and fourth method of witchcraft is when they have failed to procure an abortion, and then either devour the child or offer it to a devil. There is no doubt concerning the first two methods, since without the help of devils, a man can by natural means, such as herbs, saving, for example, or other procure that a woman can generate or conceive, as has been mentioned above, but with the other two methods it is different, for they are effected by witches, and there is no need to bring forward the arguments, since evident instances and examples will more readily show the truth of this matter. The former of these two abominations is the fact that certain witches, against the instinct of human nature, and indeed against the nature of all beasts, with the possible exception of wolves, are in the habit of devouring and eating infant children. And concerning this, the Inquisitor of Como, who has been mentioned before, has told us the following: that he was summoned by the inhabitants of the county of Barbie to hold an inquisition, because a certain man had missed his child from its cradle, and finding a congress of women in the night, swore that he saw them kill his child and drink its blood and devour it. Also, in one single year, which is the year now last past, he says that 41 witches were burned, certain others taking flight to the Lord Archduke of Austria, Sigismund. For confirmation of this, there are certain writings of John Nider in his Formicarius, of whom, as of those events which he recounts, the memory is still fresh in men's minds, wherefore it is apparent that such things are not incredible. We must add that in all these matters, witch midwives cause yet greater injury, as penitent witches have often told to us and to others, saying, "No one does more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives, for when they do not kill children, then, as if for some other purpose, they take them out of the room, and raising them up in the air, offer them to devils." But the method which they observe in crimes of this sort will be shown in the second part, which we must soon approach. But first one more question must be inquired into, namely, that of the divine permission. For it was said at the beginning that three things are necessary for the effecting of witchcraft: the devil, a witch, and the divine permission. That's a short question. Question 12. Whether the permission of Almighty God is an accompaniment of witchcraft. Now we must consider the divine permission itself, touching which four things are asked. First, whether it is necessary that this permission should accompany a work of witchcraft. Secondly, that God in his justice permits a creature naturally sinful to perpetrate witchcraft and other horrid crimes, the other two necessary concomitants being presupposed. Thirdly, that the crime of witchcraft exceeds all other evils, which God permits to be done. Fourthly, in what way this matter should be preached to the people. Concerning the third postulate of this first part, namely, the divine permission, it is asked whether it is as Catholic to affirm the divine permission in these works of witches, as it is quite heretical to contradict such an affirmation. And it is argued that it is not heretical to maintain that God does not permit so great power to the devil in this sort of witchcraft, for it is Catholic, and not heretical to refute such things as appear to be to the disparagement of the Creator. And it is submitted that it is Catholic to maintain that the devil is not allowed such power of injuring men. Everything is subject to the divine providence, since the all-wise provider keeps away, as far as possible, all defect and evil from those for whom he cares. And if the works of witchcraft are permitted by God, they are not kept away by him. And if he does not keep them away, the God himself is not a wise provider, and all things are not subject to his providence. But since this is false, therefore it is false that God permits witchcraft. And again, to permit a thing to happen presupposes in him who permits it that either he can prevent it from happening if he wishes, or he cannot prevent it even if he wishes. And neither of these suppositions can apply to God. For in the first case, such a man would be thought spiteful, and in the second case, impotent. Then it is incidentally asked, as to that bewitchment that has happened to Peter, if God could have prevented it and did not do so, then God is either despiteful or he does not care for all. But if he could not have prevented it, even if he wished, then he is not omnipotent. But since it is not possible to maintain the opinion that God does not care for all, and the rest, therefore it cannot be said that witchcraft is done with the permission of God. Besides, he who is responsible to himself and is the master of his own actions is not subject to the permission or providence of any governor. But men were made responsible to themselves by God, according to Ecclesiasticus 15. God made man from the beginning, and left him in the hand of his counsel. In particular, the sins which men do are left in their own counsel, according to their heart's desire. Therefore not all evils are subject to divine permission. Yet again, St. Augustine says in the Enchiridion, as does also Aristotle in the 9th book of Metaphysics, it is better not to know certain vile things than to know them, but all that is good is to be ascribed to God. Therefore God does not prevent the very vile works of witchcraft, whether he permits or not. See also St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, doth God take care of oxen? And the same holds good of the other irrational beasts. Wherefore God takes no care whether they are bewitched or not, since they are not subject to his permission, which proceeds from his providence. Again, that which happens of necessity has no need of provident permission or prudence. This is clearly shown in Aristotle's Ethics, Book 2. Prudence is a right reasoning concerning things which happen and are subject to counsel and choice. But several effects of witchcraft happen of necessity, as when for some reason or owing to the influence of stars, diseases come, or any other things which we judge to be witchcraft. Therefore, they are not always subject to divine permission. And again, if men are bewitched by divine permission, then it is asked, why does this happen to one more than to another? If it be said that it is because of sin, which abounds more in one than in another, this does not seem valid, for then the greater sinners would be the more bewitched. But this is manifestly not so, since they are less punished in this world. As it is said, well, is it for the liars. But if this argument were good, they also would be bewitched. Finally, it is clear from the fact that the innocent children and other just men suffer most from witchcraft. But against these arguments, it is submitted that God permits evil to be done, though he does not wish it, and this is for the perfecting of the universe. See Dionysius de Dion, Nom 3. Evil will be for all time, even to the perfecting of the universe. And St. Augustine in the Enchiridion, in all things good and evil consists the admirable beauty of the universe, so that what is said to be evil is well ordained, and kept in its due place commends more highly that which is good. For good things are more pleasing and laudable when compared with bad. St. Thomas also refutes the opinion of those who say that although God has no wish for evil, since no creature seeks for evil, either in its natural or its animal or in its intellectual appetite, while it is the will whose object is good, yet he is willing that evil should exist and be done. This he says to be false, since God neither wishes evil to be done, nor wishes it not to be done, but is willing to allow evil to be done, and this is good for the perfecting of the universe. and why it is erroneous to say that God wishes evil to be done for the good of the universe. He says is for the following reason: nothing is to be judged good except what is good in itself, and not by accident. As the virtuous man is judged good in his intellectual nature, not in his animal nature. But evil is not of itself ordained for good, but by accident. For against the intention of those who do evil, good results. In this way, against the intention of witches or against the intention of tyrants, what is that? Was it that through their persecutions the patience of martyrs shone out clearly? Answer: this question is as difficult to understand as it is profitable to elucidate. For there is among the arguments not so much of laymen as of certain wise men this in common, that they do not believe that such horrible witchcraft as has been spoken of is permitted by God, being ignorant of the causes of this divine permission. And by reason of this ignorance, since witches are not put down with the vengeance that is due to them, they seem now to be depopulating the whole of Christianity. Therefore, that both learned and unlearned may be satisfied in each way according to the opinion of the theologians, we make our answer by the discussion of two difficulties. And first, that the world is so subject to the divine providence that he himself provides for all. Secondly, that in his justice he permits the prevalence of sin, which consists of guilt, punishment, and loss, by reason of his two first permissions, namely, the fall of the angels and that of our first parents. From which also it will be clear that obstinately to disbelieve this smacks of heresy, since such a man implicates himself in the errors of the infidels. And as for the first, it is to be noted that presupposing that which pertains to the providence of God, see Wisdom 14, thy providence, O Father, governeth all things, we ought also to maintain that all things are subject to his providence, and that also he immediately provides for all things. And to make this clear, let us first refute a certain contrary error. For taking the text in Job 22, thick clouds are covering to him that he seeth not us, and he walketh in the circuit of heaven. Some have thought that the doctrine of St. Thomas, I 22, means that only incorruptible things are subject to divine providence, such as the separate essences and the stars, with also the species of lower things, which are also incorruptible. But they said that the individuals of the species, being corruptible, were not so subject, for they said that all lower things which are in the world are subject to divine providence in the universal, but not in the particular or individual sense. But to the others, this opinion did not seem tenable, since God cares for the other animals just as he does for men. Therefore the Rabbi Moses, wishing to hold a middle course, agreed with their opinion in saying that all corruptible things are not individually entirely subject to divine governance, but only in a universal sense, as has been said before. But he accepted men from the generality of corruptible things, because of the splendid nature of their intellect, which is comparable with those of the separate essences. And so, according to his opinion, whatever witchcraft happens to men comes from divine permission, but not such as happens to the animals or to the other fruits of the earth. Now, though this opinion is nearer to the truth than that which altogether denies the providence of God in worldly matters, maintaining that the world was made by chance, as did Democritus and the Epicureans, yet it is not without great fallacy. For it must be said that everything is subject to divine providence, not only in the general, but also in the particular sense, and that the bewitching not only of men, but also of animals and the fruits of the earth, comes from divine and provident permission. And this is plainly true. The providence and ordinance of things to some end extend just so far as the causality of them itself extends. To take an example from things that are subject to some master, they are so far subject to his providence as they are themselves under his control. But the causality which is of God is the original agent, and extends itself to all beings, not only in a general, but also in an individual sense, and not only to things incorruptible. Therefore, since all things must be of God, so all things are cared for by him, that is, are ordained to some end. This point is touched by St. Paul in Romans 8. All things which are from God were ordained by him, which is to say that just as all things come from God, so also are all things ordained by him, and are consequently subject to his providence. For the providence of God is to be understood as nothing else than the reason that is the cause of the ordering of the things to a purpose. Therefore, insofar as all things are a part of one purpose, so also are they subject to the providence of God. And God knows all things, not only in the mass generally, but also in the individual particularly. Now, the knowledge which God has of things created is to be compared with a craftsman's knowledge of his work. Therefore, just as all his work is subject to the order and providence of a craftsman, so are all things subject to the order and providence of God. But this does not provide a satisfactory explanation of the fact that God in justice permits evil and witchcraft to be in the world, although he is himself the provider and governor of all things. For it would seem that, if this is conceded, he ought to keep away all evil from those for whom he cares. For we see among men that a wise provider does all that he can to keep away all defect and harm from those who are in his care. Therefore, why does not God in the same way keep away all evil? It must be noted that a particular and universal controller or provider are two very different matters. For the particular controller must of necessity keep away all the harm he can, since he is not able to extract good out of evil. But God is the universal controller of the whole world, and can extract much good from particular evils, as through the persecution of the tyrants came the patience of the martyrs, and through the works of witches come the purgation or proving of the faith of the just, as will be shown. Therefore it is not God's purpose to prevent all evil, lest the universe should lack the cause of much good. Wherefore St. Augustine says in the Enchiridion, so merciful is Almighty God that he would not allow any evil to be in his works unless he were so omnipotent and good that he can bring good even out of evil. And we have an example of this in the actions of natural things. For although the corruptions and defects which occur in natural things are contrary to the purpose of that particular thing, as when a thief is hanged or when the animals are killed for human food, they are yet in accordance with the universal purpose of nature, as that man's life and property should be kept intact, and thus the universal good is preserved. For it is necessary for the conservation of the species that the death of one should be the preservation of another, for lions are kept alive by the slaughter of other animals. Thank you, Sabu. All right. Oof. How much more is this? A lot of reading. Ooh. Maybe I'll finish part one today. 14 pages. See what we can do. How many have we gotten through? Not much. So we don't count on getting through all this today. All right. Question 13. Herein is set forth the question concerning the two divine permissions which God justly allows, namely that the devil, the author or all evil, should sin, and that our first parents should fall, from which origins the works of witches are justly suffered to take place. The second question and proposition is that God justly permitted certain angels to sin indeed, which he could not have allowed unless they were capable of sin, and that in like manner he preserved certain creatures through grace, without their having previously suffered temptation, and that he justly allows man both to be tempted and to sin. And all of this is clearly shown as follows. For it is a part of divine providence that each single thing should be left to its own nature, and not be altogether impeded in its natural works. For, as Dionysius says, Providence is not a destroyer, but a preserver of nature. This being so, it is manifest that just as the good of the race is better than the good of the individual, Aristotle, Ethics 1, so also the good of the universe takes precedence of the good of any particular creature. Therefore, we must add that, if men were prevented from sinning, many steps to perfection would be removed, for that nature would be removed which has it in its power to sin or not to sin, but it has already been shown that this is a natural property of man's nature. And let it be answered that, if there had been no sin, but immediate confirmation, then there would never have appeared what debt of grace and good works is due to God, and what the power of sin has been able to effect, and many other things without which the universe would suffer great loss. For it behooved that Satan should sin, not through some outside suggestion, but that he should find in himself the occasion of sin. And this he did, when he wished to be equal to God. Now this is to be understood neither simply and directly, nor indirectly, but only with a reservation, and this is declared according to the authority of Ecclesiastes 14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High, for it must not be understood simply and directly, because in that case he would have had a limited and erring understanding, in seeking something which was impossible for him. For he knew that he was a creature created by God, and therefore he knew that it was impossible for him to become equal to his Creator. Neither, again, must it be understood indirectly, for since the whole transparence of the air consists in its subjection to the sun's rays, therefore nothing which would be contrary to the good of its nature could be sought for by an angel, but he sought for equality with God, not absolutely, but with a reservation, which was as follows. The nature of God has two qualities, that of blessedness and goodness, and the fact that all the blessedness and goodness of his creatures issues from him. Therefore the angel, seeing that the dignity of his own nature transcended that of the other creatures, wished and asked that the blessedness and goodness of all the inferior creatures should be derived from him. And he sought this in his own natural capacity, that just as he was the first to be endowed in nature with those qualities, so the other creatures should receive them from the nobility of his nature. And he sought this of God, in perfect willingness to remain subject to God, so long as he had the power granted to him. Therefore he did not wish to be made equal with God absolutely, but only with a reservation. It is further to be noted that wishing to bring his desire to the point of action, he suddenly made it known to others, and the understanding of the other angels of his desire, and their perverse consenting to it was also sudden. Therefore the sin of the first angel exceeded and preceded the sins of the others in respect of the magnitude of his guilt and causality, but not in respect of duration. See Apocalypse 12. The dragon falling from heaven drew with him the third part of the stars, and he lives in the form of Leviathan, and is king over all the children of pride. And according to Aristotle, Metaphysics 5, he is called King of Princes, inasmuch as he moves those who are subject to him according to his will and command. Therefore his sin was the occasion of sin in others, since he first not having been tempted from outside was the external temptation of others. And that all these things happen instantaneously may be exemplified by physical things. For the ignition of a gas, the sight of the flame, and the impression formed by that sight all happen at one and the same time. I have put this matter at some at some length, for in the consideration of the stupendous divine permission, in the case of the most noble creatures with regard to the one sin of ambition, it will be easier to admit particular permissions in the case of the works of witches, which are in some certain circumstances even greater sins. For in certain circumstances, the sins of witches are greater than that of the angel, or of our first parents, as will be shown in the second part. Now, the fact that the providence of God permitted the first man to be tempted into sin is sufficiently clear from what has been said concerning the transgression of the angels. For both man and the angel were created to the same end, and left with free will, in order that they might receive the reward of blessedness, not without merit. Therefore, just as the angel was not preserved from his fall, in order that the power of sin on the one side and the power of confirmation of grace on the other side might work together for the glory of the universe, so also ought it to be considered in the case of man. Wherefore St. Thomas says, that by which God is glorified ought not to be hindered from within, but God is glorified in sin, when he pardons in mercy and when he punishes in justice. Therefore it behooves him not to hinder sin. Let us then return to a brief recapitulation of our proposition, namely, that by the just providence of God, man is permitted to sin for many reasons. First, that the power of God may be shown, who alone is unchanging while every creature is variable. Secondly, that the wisdom of God may be declared, who can bring good out of evil, which could not be unless God had allowed the creature to sin. Thirdly, that the mercy of God may be made manifest, by which Christ through his death liberated man who was lost. Fourthly, that the justice of God may be shown, which not only rewards the good, but also punishes the wicked. Fifthly, that the condition of man may not be worse than that of other creatures, all of whom God so governs, that he allows them to act after their own nature, wherefore it behooved him to leave man to his own judgment. Sixthly, for the glory of men, that is, the glory of the just man, who could transgress but has not. And seventhly, for the adoring of the universe, for as there is a threshold evil and sin, namely guilty, pain, and loss, so is the universe adorned by the corresponding threefold good, namely righteousness, pleasure, and usefulness. For righteousness is adorned by guilt, pleasure by pain, and all usefulness by loss. And by this the answer to the argument is made plain. Solutions to the arguments. According to the first argument, it is heretical to maintain that the devil is allowed power to injure men. But the opposite appears rather to be true, for it is heretical to assert that God does not permit man, of his own free will, to sin when he wishes. And God permits much sin, by reason of his power to hurt men in the punishment of the wicked for the adorning of the universe. For it is said by St. Augustine in his book of Soliloquies, Thou, Lord, hast commanded, and it is so, that the shame of guilt should never be without the glory of punishment. And that is not a valid proof of the argument, which is taken from the wise ruler, who keeps away all defect and evil as far as he can. For it is quite different with God, who has an universal care, for one who has only a particular care. For God, whose care is universal, can bring good out of evil, as is shown by what has been said. For the second argument, it is clear that God's power, as well as his goodness and justice, are manifest in his permission of sin. So when it is argued that God either can or cannot prevent evil, the answer is that he can prevent it, but that for the reasons already shown, it does not behoove him to do so. Neither is it valid to object that he therefore wishes evil to be, since he can prevent it, but will not. For as has been shown in the arguments for the truth, God cannot wish evil to be. He neither wishes nor does not wish it, but he permits it for the perfecting of the universe. In the third argument, St. Augustine and Aristotle are quoted on the subject of human knowledge, saying that it is better for a man not to have knowledge of that which is evil, and vile for two reasons. First, then he will have less opportunity to think of evil, since we cannot understand many things at the same time. And secondly, because knowledge of evil sometimes perverts the will towards evil. But these arguments do not concern God, who without in detriment understands all the deeds of men and of witches. For the fourth argument, St. Paul accepts the care of God from oxen, to show that a rational creature has through free will command over its actions, as has been said. Therefore God has a special providence over him, that either blame or merit may be imputed to him, and he may receive either punishment or reward, but that God does not in this way care for the irrational beasts. But to argue from the authority that the individuals of irrational creation have no part in divine providence would be heretical, for it would be to maintain that all things are not subject to divine providence, and would be contrary to the praise which is spoken in Holy Scripture concerning the divine wisdom, which stretches mightily from end to end, and disposes all things well, and it would be the error of the Rabbi Moses, as was shown in the arguments for the truth. For the fifth argument, man did not institute nature, but puts the works of nature to the greatest use, known to his skill and strength. Therefore, human providence does not extend to the inevitable phenomena of nature, as that the sun will rise tomorrow. But God's providence does extend to these things, since he himself, the author of nature, wherefore also... he is himself the author of nature. Wherefore also defects in nature, even if they arise out of the natural course of things, are subject to divine providence. And therefore Democritus and the other natural philosophers were in error when they ascribed whatever happened to the inferior creation to the mere chance of matter. For the last argument, although every punishment is inflicted by God for sin, yet the greatest sinners are not always afflicted with witchcraft. And this may be because the devil does not wish to afflict and tempt those whom he sees to belong to him by just title, or because he does not wish them to be turned back to God. As it is said, their plagues were multiplied, and they turned them to God, etc. And that all punishment is inflicted by God for sin is shown by what follows, suffer we deserve for our sins. Now it is declared that the sins of witches are more grievous than those of the bad angels and our first parents. Wherefore, just as the innocent are punished for the sins of their fathers, so are many blameless people damned and bewitched for the sins of witches. Kind of long-winded. Question 14. The enormity of witches is considered, and it is shown that the whole matter should be rightly set forth and declared. Concerning the enormity of crimes, it is asked whether the crimes of witches exceed both in guilt, in pain, and in loss all the evils which God allows, and has permitted from the beginning of the world up till now. And it seems that they do not, especially as regards guilt. For the sin which a man commits, when he could easily avoid it, is greater than the sin which another man commits, when he could not so easily avoid it. This is shown by St. Augustine, De Circuit Dei. There is great wickedness in sinning, when it is so easy not to sin. But Adam and others who have sinned when in a state of perfection or even of grace, could more easily, because of the help of grace, have avoided their sins, especially Adam, who was created in grace, than many witches, who have not shared in such gifts. Therefore the sins of such are greater than all the crimes of witches. And again, in respect of punishment, the greatest punishment is due to the greater blame. But Adam's sin was the most heavily punished, as is plainly proved by the fact that both his guilt and his punishment are shown in all his posterity by the inheritance of original sin. Therefore his sin is greater than all other sins. And again, the same is argued in respect of loss. For according to St. Augustine, a thing is evil in that it takes away from the good. Therefore, where there is the more good lost, there the greater evil has gone before. But the sin of our first parent brought the greatest loss, both to nature and to grace, since it deprived us of innocence and immortality, and no subsequent sin has brought such loss therefore, etc. But the contrary side, That which includes the most causes of evil is the greater evil, and such are the sins of witches, for they can, with God's permission, bring every evil upon that which is good by nature and in form, as is declared in the papal bulls. Besides, Adam sinned only in doing that which was wrong in one of two ways, for it was forbidden, but was not wrong in itself. But witches and other sinners sin in doing that which is wrong in both ways, wrong in itself and forbidden, such as murderers and many other forbidden things. Therefore their sins are heavier than other sins. Besides, sin, which comes from definite malice, is heavier than sin which comes from ignorance. But witches out of great malice despise the faith, and the sacraments of the faith, as many of them have confessed. Answer. The evils which are perpetrated by modern witches exceed all other sin which God has ever permitted to be done, as was said in the title of this question. And this can be shown in three ways. In so far as they are sins involving perversity of character, though it is different with the sins of that contravene the other theological virtues. First, in general, by comparing their works indifferently with any other worldly crimes. Second, in particular, by considering the species of the superstition and into what pact they have entered with the devil. And thirdly, by comparing their sins with the sins of the bad angels, and even with that of our first parents. And first, sin is threefold, involving guilt, punishment, and loss. Good also is correspondingly threefold, involving righteousness, felicity, and use. And righteousness corresponds with the guilt, felicity with punishment, and use with loss. That the guilt of witches exceeds all other sins is apparent in this way, for according to the teachings of St. Thomas, there is in the matter of sin much that may be considered, whereby the gravity or lightness of the sin may be deduced. And the same sin may be found heavy in one and light in another. For example, we can say that in fornication a young man sins, but an old man is mad. Yet those sins are, simply speaking, the heavier which are not only attended by the more extensive and more powerful circumstances, but are in their nature and quantity of a more essentially serious sort. And so we can say that though the sin of Adam was in some respects heavier than all other sins, inasmuch as he fell to the instigation of a smaller temptation, since it came only from within, and also because he could more easily have resisted on account of the original justice in which he was created, nevertheless, in the form and quantity of sin, and in other respects which aggravate the sin, the more in that it is the cause of many yet heavier sins, the sins of the witches exceeds all other sins, and this will be made still clearer in two ways. For one sin is said to be greater than another, in one or other of the following respects: in causality, as was the sin of Lucifer; in generality, as Adam's sin; in hideousness, as was the sin of Judas; in the difficulty of forgiving it, as is the sin against the Holy Ghost; in danger, as is the sin of covetousness; in inclination, as is the sin of the flesh; in the offending of the divine majesty, as is the sin of idolatry and infidelity; in the difficulty of combating it, as the sin of pride; in blindness of the mind, as the sin of anger. Accordingly, after the sin of Lucifer, the works of witches exceed all other sins: in hideousness, since they deny him crucified; in inclination, since they commit nastiness of the flesh with devils; and blindness of mind, since in a pure spirit of malignity the rage and bring every injury upon the souls and bodies of men and beasts, as has been shown from what has been said before. And this indeed is indicated, according to St. Isidore, by the word, for they are called witches, Maleficae, on account of the enormity of their crimes, as has been said above. Our contention is also deduced from the following: there are two gradations in sin, a turning away and a change of heart. See our quotation from St. Augustine: sin is to reject the uncommutable good, and to cleave to things that are variable, and the turning away from God is as it were formal, just as the change of heart is as it were material. Therefore, the more a man is separated from God by it, the heavier is the sin. And since infidelity is the chief cause of man's separation from God, the infidelity of witches stands out as the greatest of sins. And this is given the name of heresy, which is apostasy from the faith, and in the witches sin throughout their whole lives. And in this, For the sin of infidelity consists in opposing the faith, and this may come about in two ways: by opposing a faith which has not yet been received, or by opposing it after it has been received. Of the first sort is the infidelity of the pagans or Gentiles. In the second way, the Christian faith may be denied in two ways: either by denying the prophecies concerning it, or by denying the actual manifestation of its truth. And the first of these is infidelity of the Jews, and the second the infidelity of heretics. It is clear from this that the heresy of witches is the most heinous of the 3 degrees of infidelity, and this fact is proved both by reason and authority, for it is said in St. Peter, "It has been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than after they have known it, to turn from it. And it is reasonable to suppose that just as he who does not perform what he has promised commits a greater sin than he who does not perform what he never promised, so the infidelity of heretics, who while professing the faith of the gospel fight against it by corrupting it, is a greater sin than that of the Jews and pagans. And again, the Jews sin more greatly than the pagans, for they receive the prophecy of the Christian faith in the old law, which they corrupt through badly interpreting it, which is not the case with the pagans. Therefore, their infidelity is greater sin than that of the Gentiles, who never received the faith of the gospel. But concerning apostasy, St. Thomas says in the second question 12, apostasy means a turning away from God and religion, and this may happen according to the different ways by which man is joined to God, that is, by faith, or by the subjection of the will to obedience, or by religion and holy orders. St. Raymond and Hostinus say that apostasy is a rash departure from the state of faith or obedience or religion. Now that if that which precedes is removed, that which follows from it is also removed. But the converse proposition is not true. Therefore, apostasy from the faith is a greater sin than the other 2 forms of infidelity, since in its case a precedent religion has been removed. But according to St. Raymond, a man is not to be judged an apostate or deserter, however far and long he may have strayed, unless he shows by his subsequent life that he has not the thought of returning to the faith. And this would be shown in the case of a cleric, if he were to marry a wife or commit some similar crime. In the same way it is an apostasy of disobedience when a man willfully spurns the teaching of the church and the bishops, and such a man must be convicted of his infamy and be excommunicated. Now when we speak of the apostasy of witches, we mean the apostasy of perfidy, and this is so much the more heinous, in that it springs from the pact made with the enemy of the faith and the way of salvation, for witches are bound to make this pact, which is exacted by the enemy either in part or wholly. For we inquisitors have found some witches who have denied all the articles of faith, and others who have denied only a certain number of them, but they are all bound to deny true and sacramental confession. And so even the apostasy of Julian does not seem to have been so great, although in other respects he did more harm against the church, but we cannot speak of that here. But it may be incidentally objected that it is possible that they may keep the faith and the thoughts of their hearts, which God alone, and not even any angel, can see into, but do reverence and obedience to the devil only in outward form. The answer to this seems to be that there are 2 degrees of the apostasy of perfidy. One consists in outward acts of infidelity, without the formation of any pact with the devil, as when one lives in the lands of the infidels and conforms his life to that of the Mohammedans. The other consists in a pact made with the devil by one who lives in Christian lands. In the first case, men who keep the faith in their hearts but deny it in their outward acts, though they are not apostates or heretics, are guilty of deadly sin. For in this way Solomon showed reverence to the gods of his wives, and no one can be excused on the grounds that he does this through fear. For St. Augustine says, "It is better to die of hunger than to be fed by idolaters." But however much witches may retain the faith in their hearts while denying it with their lips, they are still to be judged apostates, since they have made a treaty with death and a compact with hell. Wherefore St. Thomas, speaking of such magic works and of those who in any way seek help from devils, says, "They are all apostates from the faith by reason of a pact made with the devil, either in word, when some invocation is used, or by some deed, even if there is no actual sacrifice, for no man can serve two masters." To the same effect writes Blessed Albertus Magnus, where he asks whether the sin of magicians and astrologers is an apostasy from the faith, and he answers, "In such there is always apostasy, either of word or of deed. For if any invocations are made, then there is an open pact made with the devil, and it is plainly apostasy in word. But if their magic is simply a matter of action, then it is apostasy in deed. And since in all these there is abuse of the faith, seeing that they look from the devil what they ought to look for from God, therefore they are always to be judged apostates." See how clearly they set forth 2 degrees of apostasy, understanding a third, namely that of thought, and even if this last is lacking, yet witches are judged to be apostates in word and deed. Therefore, as will be shown, they must be subject to the punishment of heretics and apostates. And there is in them a third enormity of crime, exceeding all other heresies. For St. Augustine tells us that the whole life of infidels is a sin, and the gloss on Romans 14 says that everything which comes not of faith is sin. What then is to be thought of the whole life of witches, that is, of all their other actions which are not pleasing to the devil, such as fasting, attending church, communicating, and other things? For in all these things they commit deadly sin, as is shown as follows. So far they have fallen in sin that, although they have not lost all power of amendment, since sin does not corrupt the whole good of their nature, and a natural light yet remains in them, yet because of their homage given to the devil, and unless they be absolved from it, all their work, even when they appear to be good, are rather of an evil nature. And this is not seen to be the case with other infidels. For according to St. Thomas in the second question 10, whether every action of an infidel is a sin, he says that the deeds of the unfaithful, which are of themselves good, such as fasting, almsgiving, and deeds of that sort, are no merit to them because of their infidelity, which is a most grievous sin. Yet sin does not corrupt the whole good of their nature, and there remains in them a natural light. Therefore, not every deed of theirs is mortal sin, but only those which proceed from their very infidelity, or are related to it. For example, a Saracen fasts to observe the law of Muhammad as to fasting, and a Jew observes his feast from their very infidelity, or are related to it. For example, a Saracen fasts to observe the law of Muhammad as to fasting, and a Jew observes his feast days. But in such things he is guilty of mortal sin, and in this way is to be understood the above dictum of St. Augustine, that the whole life of infidels is sin. That witches deserve the heaviest punishment above all criminals of the world. The crimes of witches then exceed the sins of all others, and we now declare what punishment they deserve, whether as heretics or as apostates. Now heretics, according to St. Raymond, are punished in various ways, as by excommunication, deposition, confiscation of their goods, and death. The reader can be fully informed concerning all these by consulting the law relating to the sentence of excommunication. Indeed, even their followers, protectors, patrons, and defenders incur the heaviest penalties. For besides the punishment of excommunication inflicted upon them, heretics, together with their patrons, protectors, and defenders, and with their children to the second generation on the father's side, and to the first degree on the mother's side, are admitted to no benefit or office of the Church. And if a heretic have Catholic children, for the heinousness of his crime, they are deprived of their paternal inheritance. And if a man be convicted and refuse to be converted and abjure his heresy, he must at once be burned, if he is a layman. For if they who counterfeit money are summarily put to death, how much more must they who counterfeit the faith? But if he is a cleric, after solemn degradation, he is handed over to the secular court to be put to death. But if they return to the faith, they are to be imprisoned for life. But in practice they are treated more leniently after recantation than they should be according to the judgment of the bishops and Inquisition, as will be shown in the third part, where the various methods of sentencing such are treated of. That is to say, those who are arrested and convicted and have recanted their error.
They do not deny the faith.
But to punish witches in these ways does not seem sufficient, since they are not simple heretics, but apostates. More than this, in their very apostasy, they do not deny the faith for any fear of men or for any delight of the flesh, as has been said before, but apart from their abnegation, even give homage to the very devils by offering them their bodies and souls. It is clear enough from this that, however much they are penitent and return to the faith, they must not be punished like other heretics with lifelong imprisonment, but must be made to suffer the extreme penalty. And because of the temporal injury which they do to men and beasts in various ways, the laws demand this. It is even equally culpable to learn as it is to teach such iniquities, say the laws concerning soothsayers. Then how much more emphatically do they speak concerning witches, where they say the penalty for them is the confiscation of their goods and decapitation. The laws also say much concerning those who by witchcraft provoke a woman to lust, or conversely cohabit with beasts. But these matters were touched upon on the first question.
Try to get done with this.
Let's see.
Question 15. It is shown that on account of the sins of witches, the innocent are often bewitched, sometimes even for their own sins. It is a fact that by divine
Question 15. It is shown that on account of the sins of witches, the innocent are often bewitched, sometimes even for their own sins. It is a fact that by divine permission, many innocent people suffer loss and are punished by the aforesaid plagues, not for their own sins, but those of witches. Unless this should be seen to any a paradox, St. Thomas shows in the second question 8 that this is just in God, for he divides the punishments of this life into three classes. For one man belongs to another. Therefore, if a man be punished in his possessions, it may be that another man suffers for this punishment. For bodily speaking, sons are a property of the father, and slaves and animals are the property of their masters. And so the sons are sometimes punished for their parents. Thus the son born to David from adultery quickly died, and the animals of the Amalekites were bidden to be killed. Yet the reason for these things remains a mystery. Secondly, the sin of one may be passed on to another, and this in two ways: by imitation, as children imitate the sins of their parents, and slaves and dependents the sins of their masters, that they may sin more boldly. In this way the sons inherit ill-gotten gain, and slaves share in robberies and unjust feuds, in which they are often killed. And they who are subject to governors sin the more boldly when they see them sin, even if they do not commit the same sins, wherefore they are justly punished. Also, the sin of one is passed on to another in the way of desert, as when the sins of wicked subjects are passed on to a bad governor, because the sins of the subjects deserve a bad governor. See Job. He makes hypocrites to reign on account of the sins of the people. Then very often the good are punished with the wicked, as St. Augustine says in the first book of De Ciutate Dei, An example was brought to our notice as inquisitors. A town was once rendered almost destitute by the death of its citizens, and there was rumor that a certain buried woman was gradually eating the shroud in which she had been buried, and that the plague could not cease until she had eaten the whole shroud and absorbed it into her stomach. A council was held, and the podesta with the governor of the city dug up the grave and found half the shroud absorbed through the mouth and the throat into the stomach and consumed. In horror at this sight, the podesta drew his sword and cut off her head and threw it out of the grave, and at once the plague ceased. Now that the sins of the old woman were, by divine permission, visited upon the innocent on account of the dissimulation of what had happened before. For when the Inquisition was held, it was found that during a long time of her life she had been a sorceress and enchantress. Another example is the punishment of a pestilence, because David numbered the people. Thirdly, sin is passed on by divine permission and commendation of the unity of human society, that one man should take care for another by refraining from sin, and also to make sin appear the more detestable, and that the sin of one redounds upon all, as though all were one body. An example is the sin of Achan in Joshua 7. We can add to these two other methods that the wicked are punished sometimes by the good and sometimes by other wicked men. For as Gratianus says, sometimes God punishes the wicked through those who are exercising their legitimate power at his command. And this is in two ways. Sometimes with merit on the part of punishers, as when he punished the sins of the Canaanites through his people. Sometimes with no merit on the part of the punishers, but even to their own punishment, as when he punished the tribe of Benjamin and destroyed it except for a few men. And sometimes he punishes by his nations being aroused either by command or permission, but with no intention of obeying God, but rather greedy for their own gain, and therefore to their own damnation. As he now punished his people by the Turks, and did so more often by strange nations in the old law. But it must be noted that for whatever cause a man be punished, if he does not bear his pains patiently, then it becomes a scourge, not a correction, but only of vengeance, that is, of punishment. See Deuteronomy 32. A fire is kindled in man anger, that is, my punishment, for there is no other anger in God, and shall burn into the lowest hell, that is, vengeance shall begin here and burn until the last damnation, as St. Augustine explains. And there is further authority concerning punishment in his fourth distinction. But if men patiently bear their scourges and are patient in the state of grace, they take the place of a correction, as St. Thomas says in his fourth book. And this is true even of one punished for committing witchcraft, or of a witch, to a greater or less degree, according to the devotion of the sufferer and the quality of his crime. But the natural death of the body, being the last terror, is not a correction, since of its nature it partakes in the punishment for original sin. Nevertheless, according to Scotus, when it is awaited with resignation and devotion and offered in its bitterness to God, it can in some way become a correction. But violent death, whether a man deserves it or not, is always a correction, if it is borne patiently and in grace. So much for punishments inflicted on account of the sins of others. But God also punishes men in this life for their own sins, especially in the matter of bewitchment. For see Tobias 7, the devil has power over those who follow their lusts, and this is clear from what we have already said concerning the member and the genital powers, which God chiefly allows to be bewitched. However, for the purpose of preaching to the public, it is to be noted that, notwithstanding the aforesaid punishments which God inflicts on men for their own and others' sins, the preacher should keep as his basic principle, and to the people this ruling of the law, which says, no one must be punished without guilt, unless there is some cause for doing so. And this ruling holds good in the court of heaven, that is, of God, just as it does in the human courts of justice, whether secular or ecclesiastic. The preacher may predicate this of the court of heaven, For the punishment of God is of two kinds, spiritual and temporal. In the former, punishment is never found without guilt. In the latter, it is sometimes found quite without guilt, but not without cause. The first or spiritual punishment is of three kinds, the first being forfeiture of grace, and a consequent hardening in sin, which is never inflicted except for the sufferer's own guilt. The second is the punishment of loss, that is, deprivation of glory, which is never inflicted without personal guilt in adults, or contracted guilt in children born from their parents' sin. The third is the punishment of pain, that is, the torture of hellfire, and is plainly due to guilt. Wherefore, when it is said in Exodus 20, I am a jealous God, visiting the sins of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation, it is understood as speaking of the imitators of their fathers' crimes, as Gratian has explained, Book 1, Question 4, where he also gives other expositions. Now, with regard to God's second or temporal punishment, first it may be, as has been said before, for the sin of another, but not without cause, or for personal guilt only, without any other's sin. But if you wish to know the causes for which God punishes, and even without any guilt of the sufferer or another man, you may refer to the 5 methods which the Master expounds in Book 4. And you must take the 3 first causes, for the other 2 refer to personal guilt. For he says that for 5 causes God scourges man in this life, or inflicts punishment. First, that God may be glorified, and this is when some punishment or affliction is miraculously removed, as in the case of the man born blind, St. John 9, or of the raising of Lazarus, St. John 11. Secondly, if the first cause is absent, it is sent that merit may be acquired through the exercise of patience, and also that inner hidden virtue may be made manifest to others. Examples are Job 1 and Tobias 2. Thirdly, that virtue may be preserved through the humiliation of castigation. St. Paul is an example, who says of himself in 2 Corinthians, There was given unto me a thorn in my flesh, the messenger of Satan, and according to Remigius, this thorn was the infirmity of carnal desire. These are the cause that are without guilt in the sufferer. Fourthly, that the external damnation should be in this life, that it might be that in some way shown what will be suffered in hell. Examples are Herod, Acts 12, and Antiochus in Maccabees 9. Fifthly, that man may be purified by the expulsion and obliteration of his guilt through the scourges. Examples may be taken from Miriam, Aaron's sister, who was stricken with leprosy, and from the Israelites wandering in the wilderness, according to St. Jerome 23, chapter 4. Or it may be for the correction of sin, as is exemplified by the case of David, who after being pardoned for his adultery was driven from his kingdom, as is shown in 2 Kings, and is commented on by St. Gregory in his discourse on sin. It may in fact be said that every punishment that we suffer proceeds from our own sin, or at least from the original sin in which we were born, which is itself the cause of all causes. But as to punishment of loss, meaning by that eternal damnation which they will suffer in the future, no one doubts that all the damned will be tortured with grievous pains. For just as grace is followed by the blessed vision of the kingdom of heaven, so is mortal sin followed by punishment in hell. And just as the degree of blessedness in heaven are measured in accordance with the degrees of charity and grace in life, so the degrees of punishment in hell are measured according to the degree of crime in this life. See Deuteronomy 25. The measure of punishment will be according to the measure of sin, and this is so with all other sins, but applies especially to witches. See Hebrews 10. Of how much sore punishment suppose ye shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant, wherewith he was sanctified, an unholy thing. And such are the sins of witches, who deny the faith and work many evil bewitchments through the most holy sacrament, as will be shown in the second part. Question 16. The foregoing truths are set out in particular, this by a comparison of the works of witches with other baleful superstitions. Excuse me. Now the foregoing truth concerning the enormity of witches' crimes is proved by comparing them with the other practices of magicians and diviners. For there are 14 species of magic, springing from the 3 kinds of divination. The first of these 3 is open invocation of devils. The second is no more than a silent consideration of the disposition and movement of some things, as of the stars, or the days, or the hours, and such things. The third is the consideration of some human act, for the purpose of finding out something that is hidden, and is called by the name of sortilege. And the species of the first form of divination, that is, an open invocation of devils, are the following: sorcery, oniromancy, necromancy, oracles, geomancy, hydromancy, aeromancy, pyromancy, and soothsaying. See St. Thomas, 2nd of the 2nd, question 95, 26, and 5. The species of the second kind are horoscopy, haruspicy, augury, observation of omens, chiromancy, and spatulomancy. The species of the third kind vary according to all things which are classed as sortilege, for the finding out of something hidden, such as the consideration of pricks and straws, and figures in molten lead, and St. Thomas speaks also of these in the above quoted reference. Now the sins of witches exceed all these crimes, as will be proved in respect of the foregoing species. There can then be no question concerning smaller crimes. For let us consider the first species, in which those who are skilled in sorcery and glamour deceive the human senses with certain apparitions, so that corporeal matters seems to become different to the sight and the touch, as was treated of above in the matter of the methods of creating illusions. Witches are not content with such practices in respect of the genital member, causing some prestidigitory illusion of its disappearance, although this disappearance is not an actual fact. But they even frequently take away the generative power itself, so that a woman cannot conceive, and a man cannot perform the act even when he still retains his member. And without any illusion, they also cause abortion after conception, often accompanied with many other ills, and they even appear in various forms of beasts, as has been shown above. Necromancy is the summoning of and speech with the dead, as is shown by its etymology, for it is derived from the Greek word nekros, meaning a corpse, and manteia, meaning divination, and they accomplish this by working some spell over the blood of a man or some animal, knowing that the devil delights in such sin, and loves blood and the pouring out of blood. Wherefore, when they think that they call the dead from hell to answer their questions, it is the devils in the likeness of the dead who appear and give such answers. And of this sort was the art of that great Pythoness spoken of in I Kings 28, who raised up Samuel at the instance of Saul. But let no one think that such practices are lawful, because the scripture records that the soul of the just prophet, summoned from Hades to predict the event of Saul's coming war, appeared through the means of a woman who was a witch. For, as St. Augustine says to Simplicianus, it is not absurd to believe that it was permitted by some dispensation, not by the potency of any magic art, but by some hidden dispensation unknown to the Pythoness or to Saul, that the spirit of that just man should appear before the sight of the king, to deliver the divine sentence against him, or else it was not really the spirit of Samuel, aroused from its rest, but some phantasm and imaginary illusion of devils, caused by the machinations of the devil, and the scripture calls the phantasm by the name of Samuel, just as the images of things are called by the names of the things they represent. This he says in his answer to the question whether divination by the invocation of devils is lawful. In the same Summa, the reader will find the answer to the question whether there are degrees of prophecy among the blessed, and he may refer to St. Augustine 26:5. But this has little to do with the deeds of witches, which retain in themselves no vestige of piety, as it is apparent from a consideration of their works. For they do not cease to shed innocent blood, to bring hidden things to light under the guidance of devils, and by destroying the soul with the body spare neither the living nor the dead. A neuromancy may be practiced in two ways. The first is when a person uses dreams so that he may dip into the occult with the help of the revelation of devils invoked by him, with whom he has entered into an open pact. The second is when a man uses dreams for knowing the future, insofar as there is such virtue in dreams proceeding from divine revelation, from a natural and intrinsic or extrinsic cause, and such divination would not be unlawful, so says St. Thomas. And that preachers may have at least the nucleus of an understanding of this matter, we must first speak about the angels. An angel is of limited power, and can only more effectively reveal the future when the mind is adapted to such revelations than when it is not. Now the mind is chiefly so adapted after the relaxation of exterior and interior movement, as when nights are silent and the fumes of motion are quieted, and these conditions are fulfilled round about the dawn, when digestion is completed. And I say this of us who are sinners, to whom the angels in their divine piety and in the execution of their offices reveal certain things, so that when we study at the time of the dawn, we are given an understanding of certain occult matters in the Scriptures. For a good angel presides over our understanding, just as God does over our will, and the stars over our bodies. But to certain more perfect men, the angel can, at any hour, reveal things, whether they are awake or asleep. However, according to Aristotle, De Somno et Ugilia, such men are more apt to receive revelations at one time than at another, and this is the case in all matters of magic. Secondly, it is to be noted that it happens through nature's care for and regulation of the body that certain future events have their natural cause in a man's dreams, and then those dreams or visions are not cause, as was said in the case of angels, but only signs of that which is coming to man in the future, such as health or sickness or danger. And this is the opinion of Aristotle. For in the dreams of the spirit nature images the disposition of the heart, by which sickness or some other thing naturally comes to a man in the future. For if a man dreams of fires, it is a sign of a choleric disposition. If of flying or some such thing, it is a sign of a sanguine disposition. If he dreams of water or some other liquid, it is a sign of a phlegmatic. And if he dreams of terrene matters, it is a sign of a melancholy disposition. And therefore doctors are very often helped by dreams in their diagnosis, as Aristotle says in the same book. But these are slight matters in comparison with the unholy dreams of witches. For when they do not wish, as has been mentioned above, to be bodily transferred to a place, but desire to see what their fellow witches are doing, it is their practice to lie down on their left side in the name of their own and of all devils, and these things are revealed to their vision in images. And if they seek to know some secret, either for themselves or for others, they learn it in dreams from the devil, by reason of an open, not a tacit, pact entered into with him. And this pact, again, is not a symbolical one, accomplished by the sacrifice of some animal, or some act of sacrilege, or by embracing the worship of some strange cult, but it is an actual offering of themselves, body and soul, to the devil, by a sacrilegiously uttered and inwardly purposed abnegation of the faith. And not content with this, they even kill or offer to devils their own and others' children. Another species of divination is practiced by pythons, so called from Python Apollo, who is said to have been the originator of this kind of divination, according to St. Isidore. This is not effected by dreams or by converse with the dead, but by means of living men, as in the case of those who are lashed into a frenzy by the devil, either willingly or unwillingly, only for the purpose of foretelling the future, and not for the perpetration of any other monstrosities. Of this sort was the girl mentioned in Acts 16, who cried after the apostles that they were the servants of the true God, and St. Paul, being angered by this, commanded the spirit to come out of her. But it is clear that there is no comparison between such things and the deeds of witches, who, according to St. Isidore, are so called for the magnitude of their sins and the enormity of their crimes. Wherefore, for the sake of brevity, there is no need to continue this argument in respect of the minor forms of divination, since it has been proved in respect of the major forms, for the preacher may, if he wishes, apply these arguments to the other forms of divination, to geomancy, which is concerned with terrene matters, such as iron or polished stone, hydromancy, which deals with water and crystals, aeromancy, which is concerned with the air, pyromancy, which is concerned with fire, soothsaying, which has to do with the entrails of animals sacrificed on the devil's altar. For although all these are done by means of open invocation of devils, they cannot be compared with the crimes of witches, since they are not directly purposed for the harming of men, or animals, or the fruits of the earth, but only for the foreknowledge of the future. The other species of divination, which are performed with a tacit but not an open invocation of devils, are horoscopy or astrology, so called from the consideration of the stars at birth; haruspicy, which observes the days and hours; augury, which observes the behavior and cries of birds; omens, which observe the words of men; and chiromancy, which observes the lines of the hand, or the paws of animals. Anyone who wishes may refer to the teaching of Nider, and he will find much as to when such things are lawful, and when they are not, but the works of witches are never lawful. We're almost there. Is that a long one? Oh boy. Comparison of question 17. A comparison of their crimes under 14 heads with the sins of the devils of all and every kind. So heinous are the crimes of witches, that they even exceed the sins of the fall of the bad angels. And if this is true as to their guilt, how should it not also be true of their punishments in hell? And it is not difficult to prove this by various arguments with regard to their guilt. And first, although the sin of Satan is unpardonable, this is not on account of the greatness of his crime, having regard to the nature of the angels, with particular attention to the opinion of those who say that the angels were created only in a state of nature, and never in a state of grace. And since the good of grace exceeds the good of nature, therefore the sins of those who fall from a state of grace, as do the witches by denying the faith which they received in baptism, exceed the sins of the angels. And even if we say that the angels were created but not confirmed in grace, so also witches, though they are not created in grace, have yet of their own will fallen from grace, just as Satan sinned of his own will. Secondly, it is granted that Satan's sin is unpardonable for various other reasons. For St. Augustine says that he sinned at the instigation of none, therefore his sin is justly remediable by none. And St. John Damascene says that he sinned in his understanding against the character of God, and that his sin was the greater by reason of the nobility of his understanding. For the servant who knows the will of his master, etc. The same authority says that, since Satan is incapable of repentance, therefore he is incapable of pardon, and this is due to his very nature, which being spiritual could only be changed once, when he changed it forever. But this is not so with men, in whom the flesh is always warring against the spirit, or because he sinned in the high places of heaven, whereas man sins in the earth. But notwithstanding all this, his sin is in many respects small in comparison with the crimes of witches. First, as St. Anselm showed in one of the sermons, he sinned in his pride, while there was yet no punishment for sin. But witches continue to sin after great punishments have been often inflicted upon many other witches, and after the punishments which the Church teaches them have been inflicted by reason of the devil and his fall. And they make light of all these and hasten to commit, not the least deadly of sins, as do other sinners who sin through infirmity or wickedness, yet not from habitual malice, but rather the most horrible crimes from the deep malice of their hearts. Secondly, although the bad angel fell from innocence to guilt, and thence to misery and punishment, yet he fell from innocence once only, in such a way that he was never restored. But the sinner who is restored to innocence by baptism, and again falls from it, falls very deep, and this is especially true of witches, as is proved by their crimes. Thirdly, he sinned against the Creator, but we, and especially witches, sin against the Creator and the Redeemer. Fourthly, he forsook God, who permitted him to sin, but accorded him no pity, whereas we, and witches above all, withdraw ourselves from God by our sins, while in spite of his permission of our sins, he continually pities us and prevents us with his countless benefits. Fifthly, when he sinned, God rejected him, without showing him in grace, whereas we wretches run into sin, although God is continually calling us back. Sixthly, he keeps his heart hardened against the punisher, but we against the merciful persuader, both sin against God, but he against the commanding God, and we against one who dies for us, whom, as we have said, wicked witches offend above all. The solutions of the argument again declare the truth by comparison. To the arguments, the answer to the first is clear from what was said in the beginning of this whole question. It was submitted that one sin ought to be thought heavier than another, and that the sins of witches are heavier than all others in respect of guilt, but not in respect of penalties that they entail. To this it must be said that the punishment of Adam, just as his guilt, may be considered two ways, either as touching him personally, or as touching the whole of the nature, that is, the posterity which came after him. As to the first, greater sins have been committed after Adam, for he sinned only in doing that which was evil, not in itself, but because it was forbidden. Therefore, such sins deserve the heavier punishment. As to the second, it is true that the greatest punishment resulted from the first sin, but this is only indirectly true, in that through Adam all posterity was infected with original sin, and he was the first father of all those for whom the only Son of God was able to atone, by the power which was ordained. Moreover, Adam, in his own person, with the mediation of divine grace, repented and was afterwards saved through the sacrifice of Christ. But the sins of witches are incomparably greater, since they are not content with their own sins and perdition, but ever draw countless others after them. And thirdly, it follows from what has been said that it was by accident that Adam's sin involved the greater injury, for he found nature uncorrupted, and it was inevitable, and not of his own will, that he left it defiled. Therefore it does not follow that his sin was intrinsically greater than others, and again, posterity would have committed the same sin if it had not had found nature in the same state. Similarly, he who has not found grace does not commit so deadly a sin as he who has found it and lost it. This is the solution of St. Thomas in his solution of the second argument, and if anyone wishes fully to understand this solution, he must consider that even if Adam had kept his original innocence, he would not have passed it down to all posterity. Where St. Anselm says, anyone who coming after him could still have sinned. See also St. Thomas, discussion 20, where he considers whether newborn children would have been confirmed in the grace, and in discussion 101, whether men who are now saved would have been saved if Adam had not sinned. All right. Question 18. Here follows the method of preaching against the controverting 5 arguments of laymen and lewd folk, which seem to be variously approved that God does not allow so great power to the devil and witches as is involved in the performance of such mighty works of witchcraft. Finally, let the preacher be armed against certain arguments of laymen, and even of some learned men, who deny up to a certain point that there are witches. For although they conceded the malice and power of the devil to inflict such evils at his will, they deny that the divine permission is granted to him, and will not admit that God allows such things to be done. And although they have no method in their argument, groping blindly now this way and now that, it is yet necessary to reduce their assertions to 5 arguments, from which all their callings proceed. And the first is that God does not permit the devil to rage against men with such great power. The question put is whether the divine permission must always accompany an infliction caused by the devil through a witch, and given arguments are submitted to prove that God does not permit it, and that therefore there is no witchcraft in the world. And the first argument is taken from God, the second from the devil, the third from the witch, the fourth from the affliction ascribed to witchcraft, and the fifth from the preachers and judges, on the assumption that they have not so preached against and punished witches that they would have no security in life. And the first is as follows. God can punish men for their sins, and he punishes with the sword, famine, and pestilence, as well as with various and countless other infirmities, to which human nature is subject. Wherefore, there being no need for him to add further punishments, he does not permit witchcraft. Secondly, if that which is said of the devil were true, namely, that he can obstruct the generative forces so that a woman cannot conceive, or that if she does conceive, he can cause an abortion, or if there is no abortion, he can cause the children to be killed after birth, in that case, he would be able to destroy the whole world, and it could also be said that the devil's works were stronger than God's, since the sacrament of matrimony is a work of God. Thirdly, they argue from man himself that if there were any witchcraft in the world, then some men would be more bewitched than others, and that it is false argument to say that men are bewitched for a punishment of their sins, and therefore false to maintain that there is witchcraft in the world. And they prove that it is false by arguing that if it were true, then the greater sinners would receive the greater punishment, and that this is not the case, for sinners are less punished sometimes than the just, as is seen in the case of innocent children who are alleged to be bewitched. Their fourth argument can be added to that which they adduce concerning God, namely that a thing which a man can prevent and does not prevent, but allows it to be done, may be judged to proceed from his will. But since God is all good, he cannot wish evil, and therefore cannot permit evil to be done which he is able to prevent. Again, taking their argument from the infliction itself, which is alleged to be due to witchcraft, they submit that they are similar to natural infirmities and defects, and may therefore by cause be a natural defect. For it may happen through some natural defect that a man becomes lame or blind or loses his reason or even dies, wherefore such things cannot confidently be ascribed to witches. Lastly, they argue that preachers and judges have preached and practiced against witches in such a way that if there were witches, their lives would never be safe from them on account of the great hatred that witches would have for them. But the contrary arguments may be taken from the first question, where it treats of the third postulate of the first part, and those points may be propounded to the people which are most fitting, how God permits evil to be, even though he does not wish it, but he permits it for the wonderful perfecting of the universe, which may be considered in the fact that good things are more highly commendable, are more pleasing and laudable when they are compared with bad things, and authority can be quoted in support of this. Also, the depth of God's divine wisdom, justice, and goodness should be shown forth, whereas it would otherwise remain hidden. For a brief settlement of this question, there are various treatises available on this subject for the information of the people, to the effect, namely, that God justly permitted 2 falls, that of the angels and that of our first parents. And since these were the greatest of all falls, it is no matter for wonder if other smaller ones are permitted. But it is in their consequences that those 2 falls were the greatest, not in their circumstances, in which last respect, as was shown in the last question, the sins of witches exceeded those of bad angels and our first parents, In the same place it is shown how God justly permitted those first falls, and anyone is at liberty to collect and enlarge upon what is there said as much as he wishes. But we must answer their arguments. As to the first, that God punishes quite enough by means of natural diseases and by sword and famine, we make a threefold answer. First, that God did not limit his power to the process of nature, or even to the influences of the stars, in such a way that he cannot go beyond those limits, for he has often exceeded them in the punishment of sins, by sending plagues and other afflictions beyond all the influence of those stars, as when he punished the sin of pride in David, when he numbered the people by sending a pestilence upon the people. Secondly, it agrees with the divine wisdom that he should so govern all things that he allows them to act at their own instigation. Consequently, it is not his purpose to prevent altogether the malice of the devil, but rather to permit it as far as he sees it to be for the ultimate good of the universe, although it is true that the devil is continually held in check by the good angels, so that he may not do all the harm that he wishes. Similarly, he does not propose to restrain the human sins which are possible to man through his free will, such as the abnegation of the faith, and the devotion of himself to the devil, which things are in the power of the human will. From these two premises it follows that, when God is most offended, he justly permits those evils which are chiefly sought for by witches, and for which they deny the faith, up to the extent of the devil's power, and such is the ability to injure men, animals, and the fruits of the earth. Thirdly, God justly permits those evils which indirectly cause the greatest uneasiness and torment to the devil, and of such a sort are those evils which are done by witches through the power of devils. For the devil is indirectly tormented very greatly when he sees that, against his will, God uses all evil for the glory of his name, for the commendation of the faith, for the purgation of the elect, and for the acquisition of merit. For it is certain that nothing can be more galling to the pride of the devil, which he always rears up against God. As it is said, pride of them that hate thee increases ever, than that God should convert his evil machinations to his own glory. Therefore God justly permits all these things. Their second argument has been answered before, but there are 2 points in which must be answered in detail. In the first place, far from it being true that the devil or his works are stronger than God, it is apparent that his power is small, since he can do nothing without the divine permission. Therefore it may be said that the devil's power is small in comparison with the divine permission, although it is very great in comparison with earthly powers, which it naturally excels. As is shown in the often quoted text in Job 11, there is no power on earth to be compared with him. In the second place, we must answer the question with God permits witchcraft to affect the generative powers more than any other human function. This has been dealt with above under the title, How Witches Can Obstruct the Generative Powers in the Venereal Act, for it is on account of the shamefulness of that act, and because the original sin due to the guilt of our first parents is inherited by means of that act. It is symbolized also by the serpent, who is the first instrument of the devil. To their third answer, that the devil has more intention and desire to tempt the good than the wicked, although he does in fact tempt the wicked more than the good, for the reason that the wicked have more aptitude than the good to respond to his temptation. In the same way, he is more eager to injure the good than the bad, but he finds it easier to injure the wicked. And the reason for this is, according to St. Gregory, that the more often a man gives way to the devil, the harder he makes it for himself to struggle against him. But since it is wicked who most often give way to the devil, their temptations are the hardest and most frequent, as they have not the shield of faith with which to protect themselves. Concerning this shield, St. Paul speaks of Ephesians 6, above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. But on the other hand, he assails the good more bitterly than the wicked, and the reason for this is that he already possesses the wicked, but not the good, and therefore he tried the harder to draw into his power through tribulation the just, who are not his, than the wicked, who are already his. In the same way, an earthly prince more severely chastises those who disobey his law or injure his kingdom than those who do not set themselves against him. In answer to their fourth argument, in addition to what has already been written on this subject, the preacher can expound the truth that God permits evil to be done, but does not wish it to be done, by the 5 signs of the divine will, which are precept, prohibition, advice, operation, and permission. See St. Thomas, especially in his first part, question 19, article 12, where this is very plainly set forth. For although there is only one will in God, which is God himself, just as his essence is one, yet in respect of its fulfillment, his will is shown and signified to us in many ways. As the Psalm says, the mighty works of the Lord are fulfilled in all his wishes. Wherefore there is a distinction between the actual essential will of God and its visible effects, even as the will, properly so called, is the will of a man's good pleasure, but in a metaphorical sense, it is the will expressed by outward signs. For it is by signs and metaphors that we are shown that God wishes this to be. We may take an example from a human father who, while he has only one will in himself, expresses that will in 5 ways, either by his own agency or through that of someone else. Through his own agency he expresses it in 2 ways, either directly or indirectly. Directly when he himself does a thing, and then it is operation. Indirectly when he does not hinder someone else from acting. See Aristotle's Physics 4. Prohibition is indirect causation. And this is called the sign of permission. And the human father signifies his will through the agency of someone else in 3 ways. Either he orders someone to do something, or conversely, forbids something. And these are the signs of precept and prohibition. Or he persuades and advises someone to do something, and this is the sign of advice. And just as the human will is manifested in these 5 ways, so is God's will. For that God's will is shown by precept, prohibition, and advice is seen in St. Matthew 6. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. That is to say, may we on earth fulfill his precepts, avoid his prohibitions, and follow his advice. And in the same way, St. Augustine shows that permission and operation are signs of God's will, where he says in Enchiridion, nothing is done unless Almighty God wishes it to be done, either by permitting it or by himself doing it. To return to argument, it is perfectly true that when a man can prevent a thing and does not, that thing may be said to proceed from his will, and the inference that God, being all good, cannot wish evil to be done, is also true in respect of the actual good pleasure of God's will, and also in respect of 4 of the signs of his will, where it is needless to say that he cannot operate evil or command evil to be done, or fail to be opposed to evil or advise evil, but he can, however, permit evil to be done. And if it is asked, how it is possible to distinguish whether an illness is caused by witchcraft or by some natural physical defect, we answer that there are various methods. And the first is by means of judgment of doctors. See the words of St. Augustine on the Christian doctrine. To this class of superstition belong all charms and amulets, suspended or bound about the person, which the school of medicine despises. For example, doctors may perceive from circumstances, such as the patient's age, healthy complexion, and the reaction of his eyes, that his disease does not result from any defect of the blood, or the stomach, or any other infirmity, and they therefore judge that it is not due to any natural defect, but to some extrinsic cause. And since that extrinsic cause cannot be any poisonous infection, which would be accompanied by ill humors in the blood and stomach, they have sufficient reason to judge that it is due to witchcraft. And secondly, when the disease is incurable, so that the patient can be relieved by no drugs, but rather seems to be aggravated by them. Thirdly, the evil may come so suddenly upon a man that it can only be ascribed to witchcraft. An example of how this happened to one man has been made known to us. A certain well-born citizen of Spires had a wife who was of such an obstinate disposition that, though he tried to please her in every way, yet she refused in nearly every way to comply with his wishes, and was always plaguing him with abusive taunts. It happened that, on going into his house one day, and his wife railing against him as usual with opprobrious words, he wished to go out of the house to escape from quarreling. But she quickly ran before him and locked the door, by which he wished to go out, and loudly swore that, unless he beat her, there was no honesty of faith or faithfulness in him. At these heavy words he stretched out his hand, not intending to hurt her, and struck her lightly with his open palm on the buttock. Whereupon he suddenly fell to the ground and lost all his senses, and lay in bed for many weeks, afflicted with a most grievous illness. Now it is obvious that this was not a natural illness, but was caused by some witchcraft of the woman. And very many similar cases have happened, and been made known as to many. There are some who can distinguish such illnesses by means of a certain practice, which is as follows. They hold molten lead over the sick man, and pour it into a bowl of water. And if the lead condenses into some image, they judge that the sickness is due to witchcraft. And when such men are asked whether the image so formed is caused by the work of devils, or is due to some natural causes, they answer that it is due to the power of Saturn over lead, the influence of that planet being in other respects evil, and that the sun has a similar power over gold. But what should be thought of this practice, and whether it is lawful or not, will be discussed in the second part of this treatise. For the canonists say that it is lawful that vanity may be confounded by vanity, but the theologians hold a directly opposite view, saying that it is not right to do evil that good may come. In their last argument they advance several objections. First, why do not witches become rich? Secondly, why, having the favor of princes, do they not cooperate for the destruction of all their enemies? Thirdly, why are they unable to injure preachers and others who persecute them? For the first, it is to be said that witches are not generally rich for this reason, that the devils like to show their contempt for the Creator by buying witches for the lowest possible price, and also lest they should be conspicuous by their riches. Secondly, they do not injure princes because they wish to retain, as far as possible, their friendship. And if it is asked why they do not hurt their enemies, it is answered that a good angel, working on the other side, prevents such witchcraft. Compare the passage in Daniel. The prince of the Persians withstood me for 21 days. See St. Thomas in the second book of Sentences, where he debates whether there is any contest among the good angels and of what sort. Thirdly, it is said that they cannot injure inquisitors and other officials because they dispense public justice. Many examples could be added to prove this, but time does not permit it. And that is the end of part 1. That was long. Part 2 is probably going to take 3 readings. Because it's twice as long, so we'll see. Anyway, that's it for now. Anyone who's there lurking and listening, thanks for hanging. I'll see you for the next part of the reading next Monday, and probably be streaming games throughout the week. We'll see. Anyway, again, thanks for hanging, and happy Labor Day.